aspect of an effective coaching program. So when we think about the impact that our coaching program might be having on our school improvement efforts, we really need to pay attention to relationships. So much of our work, as we all know, is relationship-based. And so we want to really illuminate that today and talk a little bit more specifically about what we can do to make sure that those relationships are solid and that we are making the most impact that we can. So as Tom mentioned, this is Heather, and Joellen is on the line as well, and we're both facilitating our work together today. We've been chatting a little bit before some of you came on, but we're in Colorado. Both of us are in Colorado, and it's snowing like crazy here, and hope that you have better weather in other places, but we're happy to have the moisture, so we'll try to focus on our session and not think about the weather for the rest of our session today. If you haven't had a chance to weigh in on anything you've been thinking about, please feel free to do that. Jump in with any comments or things that you've been thinking about. We did ask you, or Cindy and Chris asked you at the last session to give some consideration to relationships between the coach and the principal, between the coach and teachers at the end of your session last week. And so some of you have weighed in on that in the chat room or in the community board, and we appreciate that. We've read many of your responses. And so as you see how this fits into the overview of our session, we will be talking about the relationships today. Next week, we'll focus on the evaluation of the coaching program and of coaches, and then move into professional learning and support for coaches, and finally the future of coaching. So that's kind of, again, a review of where we're going with all of this. So again, here's the outcome that we want for today, and more specifically, we hope that we, by the end of this week, and that means after our session today, as well as after the opportunity that you all have a chance to chat with each other in the community forum, we want to be able to describe ways to develop effective relationships as coaches with principals and teachers. Or if we're not in the coaching role, how we can influence that in our settings, in our buildings, in our districts. What can any of us do who are invested in the coaching programs that we are working with do to enhance those relationships? We want to outline the salient points of a partnership agreement. I think you talked a little bit about that last week, and we want to be a little more specific about what that looks like and how you go about doing that in our work today. And then finally, to examine strategies for addressing resistance among teachers. We know that there are people, and it probably doesn't pertain to any of you, but we've been in settings in our work where there are plenty of teachers who say, no thank you, but I'm doing fine without a coach, and I would just as soon continue working on my own. So how do we work with those kinds of people, and what can we do as coaches, administrators, any of us who stakeholders in this work to address the resistance that might be manifesting itself among teachers who really are not embracing the idea of coaching. So that's kind of the outcomes for our work today, and let's get started with talking about relationships. Joellen?
Hi everyone, it's Joellen, and I want to just start by saying that Heather and I think all of you are pretty much in agreement that, as Heather said, the relationship is the foundation of the work. In many ways, the relationship that exists between coach and teacher and coach and principal defines the parameters for the kind of work, the depth of the work, the significance of the work that can be accomplished. And so as we think about how to build relationships, we want to give some attention to those concrete strategies for developing relationships. So as we move into this next section, that's precisely what we're talking about. How do we build these relationships? They're not just magic. So we want to start with this notion that particularly when it comes to coaches, principals, and teachers, clear expectations about their individual and collaborative and collective their roles in the coaching program are important. The more we are clear about what coaches' responsibilities are, the more we are clear about teachers' responsibilities, and the more we're clear about principals' responsibilities when it comes to coaching, the more likely we are to start with common knowledge, common understanding, and common expectations. So I want to just talk about what some sample expectations might be for coaches. And clearly one that's going to come up time and time again is the expectation to frame the support around the school initiative, the school and classroom goals for student achievement. I'm even beginning to have conversations with coaches about framing their conversations around the standards that are being used to measure the effectiveness of teachers or teaching, so that teachers are more comfortable talking about those standards and understand what those standards mean and how they're translated into their own practice. So expectations around those areas might simply be that coaches engage teachers in using standards about teaching and using standards for student learning to drive some of their interactions with teachers. The teachers, when they come to coaching, might have an expectation about their participation in coaching. I sort of seeded this conversation with a post I made this morning that I encourage you all to go read, about a view that I'm beginning to take fairly strongly, that coaching must be mandatory and not voluntary. And so how is coaching presented to teachers in terms of their expectations? Are they expected to engage with the coach? Is it completely a voluntary issue? So I think that's an important issue for us to consider. I see that some of you are having trouble with sound, and I'm going to try to speak up a little bit and to hold my microphone closer to my mouth in hopes that that would help. And then for principals, what is principals' responsibility and expectations? And how are they communicating their expectations to teachers? Do principals expect to be informed about teachers' engagement with coaches? Do principals expect that every teacher in the school engages with the coach? So setting clear expectations, and there are no right expectations or wrong expectations. They're really just getting clear so that everyone understands. And this is a good starting point as a strategy for talking about building a strong relationship. And then again, particularly with building relationships with principals, is the notion of clear and frequent communication. And we recommend that coaches literally step inside their principals' offices and engage in a conversation about their communication. We encourage them to think about how frequently they will communicate, whether it will be a weekly meeting or a bi-weekly meeting or monthly meetings, and to get it scheduled on a calendar and to make it a priority. We ask coaches and principals to be focused on content and to define upfront what the content of their coaching their conversations about the coach and the coach's role will be, so that there are no opportunities to be tempted to stray into content that would be inappropriate. And inappropriate content would breach confidentiality. It might move a coach from a support role to an evaluative role, and defining the content up front is a really powerful way of staying on focus. We suggest there are 3 topics of content. Teacher, who the teacher is or teachers are, coaches are working with. Time, what time the coach is spending with teachers. And topic, what the topic is that teachers are engaged in. And sometimes we're also asking people to talk about the task being the kind of interaction coaches and teachers are having. So for example, the notion that a coach might be doing a demonstration lesson or might be doing a planning conference with a grade level or department team. Those would be examples of that. So I want to ask Tom if he'd put up the next poll, and maybe you can bring that up. And this poll asks you to respond to what expectations in your school or district about the frequency of coach-principal expectations. Just kind of get a sense of where you all are. Have you set expectations about this? So we're seeing a lot of you respond. Heather, I wonder if you want to comment on any of these responses.
So it does look like for a high percentage of you, there are no particular expectations that have been established regarding how often the coach and the principal might meet together and talk about the work. And we suspected that that might be the case, and we strongly recommend that this is something that people can do. They can establish a set pattern of how often they're going to meet and what specifically they're going to talk about in those conversations. So a few of you, about 10%, 11%, are having those conversations once a week. I'm not suggesting that it's you who's having the conversations, but the coaches in the systems that you're representing. Fewer having once a month conversations, and for the most part, many of you have not set any expectations, or your districts have not set the expectations for that kind of communication. So that tells us that we have some work to do in that area, and that there are some specific things that we can do right up front about building that relationship between the coach and the principal if we are clear about that as part of the expectations that we have.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. And I think maybe we're seeing this kind of a response because a lot of people who are joining us in this course are people who are relatively new to their roles, particularly our large team of colleagues in New York. So that might be one of the reasons why. And so let's go back to a couple questions that we'd like to hear your thinking about just in the chat box. So as you think about the relationship between principals and coaches, what would you say in your school or in your school systems is working? What do you feel good about? And what are some of the challenges that you're experiencing? And I hate to talk over your thinking, but I do want to acknowledge that many of you have commented on the notion of mandatory versus voluntary coaching, and I appreciate those comments. It's an area of focus that I'd encourage you all to give some thought to and not immediately dismiss the nature of mandatory coaching, particularly if you hold the notion of coaching taking many different forms. So I'll just encourage you to give some more thought about that, and I hope that in our discussion area we can continue this conversation. So what's working? What are your challenges? And let's just take a few minutes to get some of the thoughts that you have. having a strong leader is indeed a great opportunity when it comes to building a good relationship between coaches and principals.
And so the comment that one of you has made, I think it was maybe Carla, who asked the question about when the coach and the principal are in partnership relationship, and then sometimes the coach is also serving as a coach to the principal. And we have to acknowledge that this might be the case. Sometimes our principals don't have the expertise in instruction that some of the coaches do, and so establishing a relationship that's based on trust and openness and collegiality leads to, or can lead to, a shared vision and shared understanding about what good instruction looks like and what it is that we're hoping to see happen in our schools. Creating that shared vision together. That's an important part of it.
I think it's lovely that those of you who are just really beginning your program have an opportunity to think about many of these issues of how do you build a strong relationship between coaches and principals. I acknowledge that in some of the early work I did with developing coaches, I didn't do enough work in that area with the coaches and the school principals and district leaders, and I regret that. And now we kind of make that a mandatory part of our Coaches Academy, that coaches, principals, and our facilitators meet together. And I think it's making a difference in the focus that coaches have and the ability they have to avoid the roles that are not necessarily supporting their work. So thank you for sharing these thoughts. Heather, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, so let's go on and again, let's continue with our conversation about the partnership agreements. Cindy and Chris mentioned this last week, and they told you a little bit about the importance of it, and we want to highlight that a little bit further in our work today. We believe that having a specific, deliberate, designated conversation with the principal, at coach and principal together, having a conversation to reach some agreements about how they are going to work together and what the expectations might be is a very important part of this work. And so Jo Ellen referred a little bit to the importance of maintaining confidentiality in the conversations. That's a part of the communication aspect of the partnership agreement. We would say that it's very important that teachers have an understanding, and by the principal and the coach sharing with the teaching staff what their agreements are about confidentiality, that none of the teachers believes that the work that they are doing with the coach is reported to the principal in a way that the principal may have regard for the teacher that is different than what he might have based on his or her own visit to classrooms. So the confidentiality aspect of it is very important. And so they explicitly, the coach and the principal, have conversations about maintaining confidentiality, even to the point that the coach might say to the principal in this conversation, how would you like for me to handle it? If you ask me a question that may seem like, that puts me in an awkward position where I may not feel comfortable answering you because of the confidentiality that I have with teachers. And so how would you like for me to handle it? Just so that as we work together, if this comes up in our work, we can handle it in a professionally respectful way, and I don't need to feel put on the spot or that I'm not answering a question that you're asking me when I feel like I should not answer it because of my agreement with teachers. So that's an important part of the communication. The partnership agreement also should include specific attention to how often are we going to meet, as we mentioned earlier, how much time are we going to spend together, and what will be the things that we are talking about when we have our regular meetings together. In addition, the coach and the principal need to have conversations about how they will work together. Will the principal attend some of the team meetings that the coach might be facilitating? To what extent is the principal involved in the work of the coach? Do they conduct walkthroughs together? Does the principal, and we would hope this would be the case, of course, does the principal attend the professional learning opportunities that the coach has designed and brings the faculty together for? All of those things need to be discussed explicitly in a conversation where the coach and the principal together can make agreements about the way they're going to work together and how they're going to hold each other accountable for these things. They will be talking about the logistics, how and when they will meet, some of the logistics about the resources that are available to the coach, how the coach will enlist, or how teachers will enlist the services of the coach, some of the procedures that will be set up so that when teachers want to access the coach's services, they know how to go about doing that. And again, going back to the expectations that JoEllen talked about a little bit earlier, what are the expectations that the principal has for teachers in accessing those services? And so all of that needs to be discussed in the partnership agreement. Another point would be the use of data. Data about how the coaching program is working, what teachers are believing about the effect of the work of the coach, how they are perceiving the value of having the opportunities to work with the coach, data, of course, about the professional learning opportunities, data about student achievement. There are lots of different points of data that should be brought into the conversation, and the more explicit this can happen up front in a conversation between the coach and the principal, the less opportunity there is in the future for misunderstanding, tension, different points of view or different rememberings about things. And so sometimes it's helpful to make this a formal agreement. And as trust develops in a relationship over time, there's less and less need for the formality of the agreement. But in the beginning, it helps everyone to get off on the same footage and not to have the anxiety, wondering whose responsibility is this? Should I talk to the principal or not about this? If you can be clear about it up front, we think that's the most important point about that. JoEllen, do you want to add anything before we move forward with another poll?
I think the only thing I want to highlight, so I'm going to take my purple highlighter and run it across a couple things you said. Setting partnership agreements is a really different way of working with principals who, in many cases for coaches, have been there and are their supervisors. And so in some cases, coaches might be thinking, well, who am I to go in to my principal and begin to set agreements? And I would say to you that I don't think I have yet encountered, although there may be a few out there and I just haven't had the opportunity to meet the principals, who would be resentful of a coach taking initiative to gain clarity about all of this. Principals must always retain their role as instructional leaders, and they now have the benefit of having coaches who can help them in that role, and this is just a matter of how do we make it work. It's to presume positive intention on everyone's part. It's to be clear so that we're all working toward the same end and we share a vision, as so many of you have said. And it's about setting the conditions so that we can all be successful. Who would resist engaging in that kind of conversation? And because coaches have the opportunity to understand more about these partnership agreements, I often hold them accountable for being the first person to initiate the conversation. And I am fully confident that your principals will welcome the opportunity to explore these ideas with you. And those of you who are district-based coaches, this work becomes even more challenging when you're working with multiple principals. And so your district coach champion needs to help you establish a set of parameters and a set of partnership agreements that will work across schools as well, yet you still are responsible for building those relationships with principals in the schools in which you work. So let's go to another poll, Tom. Again, just looking at the relationship between principals and coaches, kind of staying on that topic for a minute. We talked about frequency just a few minutes ago. This one asking us about how you would rate the effectiveness of the relationships as they currently stand. And then we'll ask you to unpack it a bit in a minute. This is good news. Really good news. So I think it's really helpful that we're seeing a good number of people saying they have somewhat effective response relationships with their principals. A good number of you, of course, same number, saying that you have a kind of a neutral relationship. But that's wonderful. Thanks. And let me just ask if we can go back to the slides, Tom, to have you all just think for a minute about what the impact is with either a negative or positive relationship. So I'm just going to ask you to share a couple comments. Hey, Brian, that's a beautiful response. Thank you. I don't know about Heather, but my eyes are like worn out already, just trying to keep up, and I cannot keep up. I am going to be so excited to sit and read your comments more thoughtfully and deeply after this session. They will be just a great opportunity for me to learn from you. It's very difficult to read and kind of process and think at the same time. So
yes.
Thank you for being so active in your comments.
Yes, and thank you, Tom, for your help with compiling all of this. Anyone else want to comment? Any other comments on the relationship?
Yeah,
progress. Yes, and it does take time.
It does. I have worked with a group of coaches and principals for over 8 years, and I'm finally at the point where I feel the principal and the coach, even though the principal and the coach have changed. Well, now there's some interesting sounds. I wonder what those are. I feel like people can be honest with each other, and that's really remarkable to me. I'm excited. All right, Heather, I'm going to let you.
Well, I'd like to build on that comment that Katie just made when Katie said that coaching has improved the relationship I have with teachers. And so we want to really move in now to talking more about building the relationship with teachers. So as we think about the relationship that the coach has built with the principal, what's the same or what's different about the way that the coach sets up agreements or works with teachers that would have some overlap to the things we've said already about the way that the coach works with the principal. We would invite you again to chat your comments and help us think about that. What's the same and what's different about how the coach works with teachers versus how the coach works with the principal? And let's hear your thoughts about that. And Joellen and I will again try to respond to some of your comments as best we can.
I want to acknowledge, Lisa, I think you have done this a couple times today in your comments in the chat, referenced text, in particular pages in the text, and you're doing such a great job with that, so thank you so much. Heather, we should follow Lisa's model of referencing text.
Yes, yes, I appreciate it.
Thank you. Now I know why. Now I know why. Thank you, Chris, for helping us understand that Lisa is the ELA expert. All those text connections that we're wanting to make today. Thank you.
I like the fact that many of you are seeing that there are some commonalities between what the coach might do to establish relationships that are founded on trust and clarity of expectations with the teachers, the same as there are with principals. The more explicit you can be upfront with each other, coaches and teachers together, about who's going to do what kinds of services the teachers might expect from the coach, and some of those agreements about how and when they will work together. All of those things lead to better understandings, higher levels of trust and collaboration within the culture of the school, and it really helps to prevent the misunderstandings, the anxiety that can come from not knowing and not having clear expectations in common. You might have expectations that are different than I might have, and so we have clear expectations, but we may not be in agreement with each other. It's that partnership conversation that helps us to make sure that we have the same expectations of each other and that we agree on what is appropriate in the way that we work together, rather than having expectations that may not be fitting for one or the other parties. So it's only through that explicit conversation that happens. We can't make assumptions. We all know that.
So I think that we recognize that there are many of the same kind of strategies that we use to build relationships with principals that we use with teachers. The strategies aren't the same. Hopefully the outcomes won't be different. Hopefully they'll be the same. We want to be sure that we're building constructive, productive relationships with and among adults within a school. And so how a coach approaches this work with a principal really will be very much the same with how a coach approaches the work with teachers. So one of the things I strongly recommend is that when a coach and principal form their partnership agreements, that they meet with the entire staff and stand side by side and share their agreements, the agreements the coach and principal have made between them. They share those with the staff. So the staff knows what the agreements are between the coach and principal. And I have found that that diminishes some of the sense that the coach is, you know, doing the good teacher, bad teacher conversation, as some of you have mentioned. So that's great.
And I would just add that another commonality, of course, is the confidentiality agreements. Teachers need to know directly. You can't just put it in writing. They have to hear you say that you will not be sharing information of a confidential nature with the principal. Just making that assumption or just talking about confidentiality without really defining what that means is not enough. Teachers, in order to have the confidence that they can work with you and that you work with the coach and know that the coach will support the teacher's growth, need to hear explicitly from the coach how the information will be used, and that it will not be reported to the principal in a way that could be used for evaluative purposes, nor will the coach be in that evaluative role. And we recognize that there are some situations where district policies actually influence some of this too. But it's an important part of the relationship building.
Yeah, good point, Heather. That's important for us to acknowledge. I think, you know, we're seeing the more open we see a culture within a school, a culture of deprivatization, as Lisa mentioned earlier, or of a culture of learning, that we're not looking at a need for support or a desire to learn as something that we should judge as being a negative. We should celebrate those. If someone has a question or is having a struggle, there's an opportunity for everyone to learn. And I think how we characterize all of this in our language, in our conversations with principals, as well as with teachers themselves, shifts significantly how the culture accepts coaching. So, Heather, if it's all right with you, I'd like to move on if I could.
I think so.
Thanks again, Lisa, for your text reference. So I want to address voice and choice briefly. These are two principles that emerge from the work of Jim Knight, and we acknowledge that there are significant principles that influence the relationship that occurs between a coach and a teacher. There are other principles that Jim has researched and writes about. These are two that are pretty significant in relationship building and relationship sustaining. And they include voice meaning that teacher has influence in the interaction with the coach, and that the coach is open to allowing the teacher to be self-directing, allow the coach to take leadership, or allow the teacher to take leadership of his or her own learning, to be heard in a way that is open and honest and fair without judgment. And I think the other thing that's important is I keep hearing these bells, and I wonder if every time I hear those, I wonder if some big point I just made that I didn't recognize, but something did. So the other principle here besides voice is choice, and choice for me simply comes down to the roles coaches are in and the services coaches are providing to teachers. And one of the things that we have frequently, somehow or another, inappropriately conveyed is that coaching only means the role of classroom supporter. And it may mean that in your own definition of coaching and how you think about the role of a coach and how you've defined the role of a coach. And by that I mean that you're inside a teacher's classroom modeling teaching or observing teaching and providing feedback or co-teaching. However, that's one of the 10 roles of coaching. There are 9 other ways coaches can support the improvement of student learning through their interactions with teachers. And so we want to be able to help teachers understand that they have lots of options for interacting with a coach that don't mean the coach has to be inside a teacher's classroom. Planning conversations and planning meetings are in many cases more influential in shifting teaching and learning than a feedback conference following an observation. If we can change it on the front end rather than talk about it on the back end, we can do so much more, in my mind, to influence what occurs between a teacher and a classroom. So as we think about choice, it's important that coaches and coach champions are helping coaches talk about the types of interactions they can have with teachers and give teachers choice about which of those interactions to have to solve particular problems. So choice and voice, two really important issues that are necessary in this conversation. And I think we want to move to another poll, right, Heather?
Yes, we do. So, Tom, if you could help us with that. So this is good news, too. We're seeing that, and I'm sorry, those are my chimes. Well, I think I'm going to just see if I can unplug them. They're electronic. I'm going to unplug the chimes.
Unplug the chimes. I thought it was funny. So while you're unplugging, Heather, I might just comment. On the responses here, it seems that the percentage is on that 25%, those are 25 to 50%, obviously. And I think I would ask you all to just consider, what is it that teachers are resisting? Are they resisting learning and growing? Are they resisting anyone suggesting that they're not working at their best? And if that message is being given through coaching, then I think we've got a big challenge. Is it they're resisting working with someone to continue to refine and strengthen their practice? What is it exactly that they're resisting? And if you can begin to try to just open doors and have some of those conversations, I think that you can begin to understand why some of that resistance is happening. So timing, are these conversations occurring during the school day, outside the school day, hidden agenda? Some of you are mentioning some really good reasons. What's prompting that fear, and unpack it with people. Challenge those fears in a constructive way by saying again and again, this is what coaching is and what it isn't. And then demonstrate that through the integrity of your actions and words, or in any communication you do. So thanks, Tom, for that poll. Heather, do you want to comment?
And if you could go to slide 19, I think it is, so that we could encourage people again, not the poll, but the next slide that asks, let me do this. What are some of the reasons that teachers resist working with the coach, and what are the strategies that you have found useful? So again, let's extend this opportunity for just a couple more minutes to let people comment on what they see as some of the reasons. And some of you have already commented on the fact that that it's fear-based in many instances. It may be lack of insecurity, just the change. There are lots of demands on teachers, as we know, and we're living in an age of much higher accountability, much closer scrutiny than we have in the past, and so we know that many teachers might be out of their comfort zones. So how can we address that? What are some things that you have found that are useful in helping to address these reasons that people might be fearful or resisting the work that we could do with them as coaches? I like the idea that you're saying, Robert, don't ignore them, go for it. I think by ignoring them, we discount the importance of growth for all teachers. certainly the relationships that we build with teachers is an important part of this. If we have not used strategies to be transparent in our thinking, to be welcoming and encouraging, sometimes teachers resist our efforts.
Lindsay's comment about privatizing coaching can stigmatize it is a lovely comment, Lindsay, and several of you are making similar comments. And I think the more we try to build that privatization around coaching, the more we're creating contradictions in our schools about what we mean about a culture of learning or a culture of collective responsibility or a culture of openness. And I would strive to break some of that by engaging in more team coaching, engaging in conversations with individual teachers where you encourage them to share what they're learning from their coaching interactions with others, where you ask permission to share or invite another teacher to learn about what teachers are doing in their classrooms, or share with permission examples of what teachers are doing. I think the more we can open the door instead of close it, the more successful we'll be in transforming our cultures so that everyone is learning. And I think it's that culture of secretiveness and fear of being inadequate that are really some of the big drivers to this resistance. There may be others, change in leadership and pressure, as so many of you have acknowledged. There are clearly reasons for teachers to feel resistant, but coaching really is a strategy that should reduce the pressure. So if we're doing it right, so I'll pause there.
I think that Mandy's comment, I think it was Mandy's comment about coaches proving that they're not evaluative and proving their trustworthiness in their work is an important part of it. While teachers might be reluctant in the beginning, when they can begin to see by how the coach interacts with other teachers and with the principal that there is no danger that they are going to be the topic of a conversation among any other staff members, or between the coach and other staff members. I think then they gain confidence that maybe it is okay for me to invite this coach in. And certainly the work that the coach can do with teams of teachers allows that reluctant teacher to have some experience with the coach collectively as part of a group, and may then pave the way, so to speak, for that teacher to be more open to working with the coach individually at some time later on. So that's another point to make.
And I think, Heather, if I'm not mistaken, there'll be some attention to team coaching later, maybe session 4 or 5.
Yes, I think it's in session 4, if I'm not mistaken. So okay. Yes, we'll talk more about that later on.
I want to just comment on a strategy that I find so powerful for dissipating resistance. And it's going to seem kind of silly, but I want you to know it's very hard. And that is doing nothing but listening. Not even probing, not even paraphrasing, not even, certainly not offering advice, just listening and accepting and honoring, acknowledging what's being said in a very neutral way. So often we have people who are facing things that we can't even imagine, the way they're perceiving the pressures, and we don't know their full story. None of us know anyone's full story. And if we can just learn to accept, honor through deep listening, it's probably your most powerful coaching strategy. And I think as coaches, we always want to fix things, and fixing things when you're dealing with someone who is resisting, probably really not necessarily resisting coaching, but feeling fear and anxiety about other things, the best thing we can do is listen.
I agree with you totally, Joellen. I think we so often jump to the default mode of giving advice or trying to figure out the problem solutions rather than just acknowledging where people are. And if we can listen without judgment, people are more inclined to relate to us, especially those people who might be not embracing the work with the coach as much as others would. So thank you all for weighing in on that and your experiences with resistance. We want to start to bring some closure to our session to today. So I'm going to ask that you think about what is the most important point that you are taking away from this work that we're doing together today, and what might be an action step that you would take as you proceed with your own coaching program or your own coaching work. As we have talked about the things on our agenda today, as we've talked about the relationship building with principals and with teachers that the coach engages in, and as we've thought about teachers having choice and voice and working with resistors, what's the most important point for each of you that you will be taking away? And if you could post some comments in the chat room, that would be great again.
Great comments. Acknowledging resources. Steve Barkley as a resource, cognitive coaching as a resource, the tools in the book as resources for you.
The power of agreements. Many of you are commenting on the importance of being explicit in those agreements with clients.
I love the language that you're using around listening. I see committed listening, and I see respectful listening. I wonder if you would all just experiment this week with an opportunity just to listen and see how difficult it is not to ask a question and how difficult it is not to immediately go to fix or not to tell your own story in the midst of that listening. Try it out this week with someone and kind of assess how it feels to you. Oh, Lynn, I love that phrase. I there's all kinds of images in my mind. Speaking about the power of language, there you are, right there. We're following, of course, along and chuckling at your responses. I suspect some of you are as well. Great.
So
everyone.
Let's begin to think a little bit about where we go from here and what we might do to follow up with our conversations and the work we've done together today. As you know from the book and from the work that you did last week with Cindy and Chris, there are recommendations at the end of each chapter following the scenario In each chapter, there are some recommendations for what central office administrators might do, what building administrators might do, and what coaches might do to address the things that have been discussed in the chapters. So here are some examples on this slide for each of those categories. Again, specific things that people in these different roles might do to ensure that there are effective relationships in place in schools between coaches and principals and between coaches and teachers. And so one of the things that we'd like to suggest that you do in the community forum this next week is to explain, post your intentions, which ones of these recommendations might be something that you think is appropriate for you to do based on where you are with your program, where you are in the work that you're doing, and explain to us why it's important for you to do and how you think it might affect the effectiveness of your coaching program. So again, in follow-up for today's session, think about some of these recommendations and select one or two and talk about it in the community forum. And then, Joellen, you want to talk about next week? Since
I will. Before I jump into that, I just want to say thank you to those of you who are posting some specific actions that you're taking next. And I appreciate that, Katie. For example, your most recent, your post here, specific steps that you're going to take based on today's learning. And I hope others of you are thinking in a similar way. What's your immediate next step based on today? So let's look forward then. Next week, we will talk about a topic that Robert particularly has been focused on over the last couple of weeks and commenting on, as many of you have as well, and that's how do we know whether or not coaching is effective and whether or not our coaches are effective. And so as we look forward, we want to encourage you to read Chapter 11, which is the chapter on evaluating coaches and coaching. We want to ask you to think about some questions that will help you really be able to more quickly get into this topic, and that is whether or not you're clear about the goals of your coaching program and what you're currently doing to measure whether or not you're attaining those goals and how you are currently doing that. So if you bring that with you into next week's session, Heather and I look forward to working with you next week and unpacking this whole topic of how do we know coaching is effective. And I'm going to leave you with this one thought, and that is, over the years that I've been working with coaching programs, and it's been many years, over 30 years, I have seen coaching programs come and go, and one of the most common reasons they go is because there is no evidence that the investment that districts are making in coaching is having any impact. And for me, the topic of evaluation is significant in this work, and I look forward to working with you next week. And I also look forward to reviewing this session and everything that you've said that I am sad I couldn't focus on as you were saying it. Heather, I'll let you have a last word, and then we'll turn it to Tom to wrap up.
I just want to say thank you also, and I also look forward to reading your comments more fully and thinking about what you've been saying, and looking forward to reading your comments in the community forum throughout the week. So thank you, everyone, for participating today, and we look forward to spending another session with you next week. Tom?
Okay. Heather and Joellen, thank you, and how you were able to even kind of keep up with some of this volume of chat was miraculous. Thank you, everybody. This was a great hour, and just really appreciate everybody posting ideas and questions and comments for other people's questions. Wow, this is an incredible volume of interaction during our hours. I will compile all of our chat into a file that I'll post in the community, and then also I'd kind of been private chatting with a couple of you about questions or comments that you had that sort of slipped through the cracks a little bit, and that we certainly can post in the community during the week. Obviously, as Heather and Joellen mentioned, we have a couple things on the slide here that we want to focus on this week, but we had a lot of good discussion during this hour and lots of opportunities to follow up, and obviously the group that we have here is going to be more than willing to share ideas and share resources to address a question or an issue that you might be working through. Wow, this was really a great hour. So I will send a follow-up announcement at the end of the day today, hopefully by the end of the day today. And in that announcement will actually be an offer to participate in another e-learning program that we have for free for members of this current program. So read all the way to the end of the email announcement that I send today. We will post all of this stuff, the link to the recording of the session, and we'll post the discussion prompts that will get us kick-started for the rest of the week in the community by the end of the day. And again, just thank you all for being here, and this has really been a good 2-week start to our program. Really looking forward to next week already. So thank you for your participation, and we will talk to you next week. So have a great rest of the week.